Fusepump, any of you heard of it before? I suspect not. Anyone? No. Right. We're very much a B2B proposition, so I'll explain to you guys what we do a little bit. But I think the interest of the story really that I'm going to try and get across to you guys was the fact that we started with no cash, very much a bootstrap organic growth business, which is obviously easy to do in the B2B sector. Let's try and share some insights on kind of how we did that, so get your attention with starting a business in the tech sector with no cash. So, but what we do is we make e-commerce marketing easy, so I'll tell you what e-commerce marketing is in a second, and a little bit more about our history. Just in terms of what we're going to go through, it was very short notice yesterday, but just put together a presentation talking about what we did. Some more anecdotal stuff on how we sort of did it, that hopefully will be transferable to some of you guys. And then going to try and give you some insights into where I think development opportunities are in the e-commerce sector. Just a couple of trends that certainly, I invest in businesses occasionally, sit on the board with advising to a couple of other businesses, and there's definitely some trends emerging, I think, for future growth to any of you thinking of starting businesses in this sector. So hopefully try and give you some points on that. So just first of all, to frame the e-commerce sector, this is the stats here. It's about 80 billion last year, I think. 2012 should hit about 87 billion this year, so it's still growing at about 10-12% a year. And obviously mobile is a huge trend. I'm not going to talk about that too much today, because it's probably teaching you guys to take, but 300% growth in mobile e-commerce apparently since during 2012, which is obviously a huge trend. Yeah, so what are retailers doing? If we look at John Lewis, our client of ours, we've been working with them for about 3 years now actually. But they were talking a lot on the radio around Christmas time about having fantastic December. They said 25% of their sales this year came from e-commerce, and I can see why they're doing a lot right in that sector. Hopefully we're helping them as well with that. But no, it's just a good example of a retailer who's really embraced e-commerce. Obviously traditionally bricks and mortar retailer, we've really kind of grabbed hold of e-commerce and made it perform well for them. But it's a complex sector as well, so this is a chart that presented to me not long after I first started working in this sector, to kind of break down some of the different industries, the landscape of e-commerce. Because behind the actual sellers themselves, like your John Lewis's or your higher growth new retailers like on the high streets and .coms, behind all those guys, there's a whole set of service businesses that provide things from marketing automation, customer relations management software, through to multi-channel marketing management, which is the area we sit in, I suppose. There's this whole kind of service infrastructure there to support the e-commerce industry, and I think myself and a lot of my friends have been starting businesses in this sector, really seeing fast growth without sort of taking too much risk at the start. So yeah, you can pick out some of the company names on there. I'm not sure how many of them I know because most of them are service businesses, but some of the big guys like your SQL and Oracle are on there as well. So our business mission statement was to make e-commerce marketing simple and profitable for online sellers. We have a software platform that enables them to do that, which I'll talk a bit more about in a second. But really, we have a secondary goal, which is more focused on the user perspective. So the kind of greater good we're trying to do for the universe, which hopefully transfers into cash, is to improve the online shopping experience. So it's really about making the shopping experience as easy as possible, finding ways of getting the right products in front of the right user at the right time so that they will purchase. And technologically, that's very challenging to do. So here's an illustration of what our platform does. So for example, M&S, who are one of our clients, they have about 50,000 different products, and each day some come in stock, some go out of stock, they all change price point. Some are televisions, some are women's knickers, there's a whole diversity of products there. What we do is we use our platform, we gather the product data from their website, and then we syndicate it to all the various marketing channels, so we make sure that their products are being advertised correctly and accurately on price comparison websites, in display banners that you might see on marketplaces, so like eBay and Amazon. And within mobile apps, there's a whole range of those now, like Shops Alley, where you kind of scan the barcode and it does price comparison for you. Social media as well, and then content sites, so they can range from kind of review websites through to bloggers even in the fashion sector who are just generating useful, interesting insights. So making sure your product inventory is correctly advertised on all those channels is really quite a challenge for a large retailer, and that's what our platform is. So this is a selection of some of our other clients. Excuse me. Yeah, so they're obviously all big brands. I think that's one of the things that made it really easy for us to grow organically, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on, was working with brands who have good budgets and are prepared to spend money on innovative technology as well. So all of those are probably brands that you've heard of. The challenge for us really now, which I'll also talk about, is productising and actually getting into the middle market, because it's actually more difficult to service small clients for us, which is interesting. So just to give you a feel for some of our KPIs, we process about 2.16 million products a day now. So for all our advertisers, that's the rough number of product inventory that we scan every day. And we work with about 287 different applications, so they would range, like I said, from small blog websites through to massive kind of CSCs like travel supermarkets and guys like that. And I haven't put the actual figure in there, but it's actually nearly hundreds of millions of e-commerce sales each month that we drive online, that we influence in some way, or that we track through our platform, which is obviously a huge number, astonishing. Looking back, I never thought we'd sort of guess that level as quickly as we did. So just the history financially of the business, we started 4 years ago, like Thomas said earlier, March 2009, so just coming up to our 4th birthday. And we've experienced a pretty sort of, straight line revenue curve, but it's a straight line in the right direction. Last year was actually great for us. We did about 80% growth from the previous year. And in terms of headcount, we're up to about 50, 55 probably now in the office in London. It's always an interesting measurement, of how the business has progressed. But I remember at the end of the first year, there was 5 of us sat in an office and in Farringdon, and now sort of it feels like a very different place, which I'll talk about a bit later on as well. So here's the sort of how to do it with no cash thing. I hope you've all heard the friends, family, and fools analogy before. Probably teaching you to suck eggs at Oxford Business School, isn't it? But £35,000 was about the total amount we raised, and actually one of the fools was a bank who lent us 25 grand. This is right in the middle of the recession. Really interesting there, because we literally knocked on the door for there's no chance we're going to get a loan from the bank in this economic climate, and they did. I won't say which one it was because it was called before, but it actually turned out to be sensible, and that 25 grand really made it completely possible for us. We raised about £110 from family and friends really. So hopefully it'll come across in this talk how we did it with very little cash. Create that platform for more extensive growth, which we're now kind of realising. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just identifying a niche, just tell you how we sort of found it. The problem that we solve is, your marketing manager at one of these big retail brands like John Lewis obviously wants to they want to work with all these websites, they want to be on the blog websites, they want to be on the comparison shopping engines, because they know that they get traffic and they deliver sales from those channels, but technologically it's not straightforward. Because to work with any of them, you have to export your product inventory in a data feed to them. So that's an XML file or something like that that gets sent every hour and synchronized to make sure it's all up to date. And just technologically in-house for the big retail brands is something they couldn't do. We had never thought of it until we started talking to them. But because we kind of, we saw them on comparison shopping engines and thought, well, they must be solving this problem already. But as soon as we started talking to some of the bigger retailers, they just said, oh yeah, technology team have told us it's going to be 2 years before we get a feed. So we can't work with any of those guys yet. Which was really, really interesting. So what we did was we built technology that sits in the middle. We can pull the inventory ourselves from their website, so basically scrape it, so screen scraping. And then we obviously plug it into all of these marketing applications. It's quite a defensible technology problem as well. I think more merchants are starting to build feeds in-house, but at the end of the day, it's a one-to-many problem. So you've got hundreds of partners potentially you want to work with, and there's new ones appearing and leaving every week. So fortunately, there's always a throughput of kind of customization of data that needs to be delivered. And it's important, obviously, to make sure that it is a defensible long-term problem that you're solving. The other thing is checking that it's a big problem. So, like I said, we really fell into it just by talking to retailers and talking to partners as well. We sort of realised it wasn't a straightforward area. But I've had friends who've made mistakes with thinking they found a valuable problem and they're just not doing enough kind of market research. Market research for me doesn't mean trawling through statistics. Look at a lot of business plans where someone's presenting you a market rather than a business. It's very easy to present e-commerce growth stats on mobile sector growth. But the point is, show me a client who's actually going to spend money on solving this problem, and don't just show me one, show me 10. So that's something that we did very well, I think, before we kind of took too much risk early on, was make sure that we had a kind of pipeline of clients who said, yes, we want to do this if you can deliver the service. The third thing is find out how to try and solve it. Obviously, that's your competitive landscape, and we were very fortunate to get into the niche. It was a genuine niche that no one else doing it when we started doing it. But we're now acutely aware of other people trying to enter the market and keep a really good eye on competition. I think there's a lot of niches that you can enter work with, obviously, competitors already. You need to embrace them. There's no point in they're there and they're trying to do what you're trying to do. So, building the technology, this was an interesting one for me. So I'm from a computer science background. I developed the technology that we used before we started the business, really. So we were trying to apply that technology to a particular market, and that was the one we found. There's actually loads of other market applications for it that we kind of we could extend into, but we just don't have time at the moment. I think a lot of other businesses, certainly from friends and what have you, started them, don't necessarily have that benefit. You know, some of the big, you know, Facebooks and what have you were started by developers and what have you. But there are a lot of successful businesses that aren't. I think this Venn diagram is worth thinking about. The reason I put it up there is UX is user experience, by the way. If it's a web business, if it's a technology or an online business, you've got to have someone who's acutely aware of the user experience. If you're not that person, you need to have somebody who's going to kind of take ownership of it. On the tech side, you've got to have someone who's going to build, and actually those roles are different. I think in a lot of businesses that we're seeing at the moment, it's good to have a really strong design-focused UI UX engineer, as well as your kind of hardcore tech user in your work. And then the business stimulus is obviously really important. The best founders, the theory is kind of sit in the middle. Hopefully I'm one of them, but I think I need to do it once or twice more before I've proved that. So the main point of this is really thinking about product ownership as well. If you're just business minded, you're not the tech guy, you're not the user experience guy, then you really need to make sure that you create within the business product ownership. Someone needs to nurture the product and love it like it's their child. If they don't, it just won't move forwards. And I've looked at lots of other businesses where they're missing one key component of this triangle, and it's just it's not investable for that reason. Having said that, it's possible to find people who can bridge the gap, and then you've got to make sure they're properly incentivised from an equity perspective, I think, if you're going to do it that way. So, yeah, this slide's really just about how you pay for it next. So once you've got your team together, once you've decided what you're going to build, how do you actually build it for free? Something we did very effectively. This is just one example of something we did for M&S. This was a client project. It's an application that enables you to kind of to browse the inventory, and as you can see the plus points, you press on them and it shows you the prices and what have you. It was just a little niche application. It's something that they came and asked us to do. Not core business for us, but something they're prepared to pay for. So we took it on, and we've been very good the whole time at taking on project work and to subsidise. I think that's the only real way of doing it organically. You've got to chase the cash to some extent. And I'll talk about how that relates to product development more later. Finding clients was fairly easy for us. I showed you the slide earlier, but because we work with so many downstream partners and it's a B2B relationship, it was actually very easy for us to kind of get access to fairly high-level clients quickly because we're solving the problem at both ends. So we got most of our referrals through the partners and the applications that we work with, and that started to spiral very quickly. I think if you're trying to grow an organic business, it's nice to do something in the B2B space where you get that kind of value through partnerships. It definitely reduces the risk. The other thing that we did was early adopter clients. So how many of you have heard of Nottingham High Street? No, not that many actually. I'm fully involved with it. Really fast-growing e-commerce retailer. They're not John Lewis. They're not M&S. Very nice clients to have as well. But what they were was a very fast-growing e-commerce business, and kind of it's great to have clients like that because you can piggyback off their success to some extent. They tend to be forward-thinking as well in terms of what technology they adopt. I think the other point here was this is a nice little testimonial. It's not the clearest or best said statement I've ever read actually, but what we were very good at is making sure that when we were doing work for clients, they talked about it and we PR'd it and we released it to the market and everybody else knew what we were doing. That's why when we signed Thomas and Thomas would call us 2 weeks later, that's really, really important. This is just another example that's more around a product launch. At Model Zone, again, we just, how many of you heard of Model Zone? Yeah, so again, not like a kind of front of mind massive brand, but we're experiencing really great e-commerce work. We've done some other work with them, and this was a new product. I mean, when we first launched our integration with Play.com, which is about bracketing, but they're more into the marketplace space now. I think Play.com shut down their retail model now, and so this was a trialing new integration with those guys, and then I think we did the work for free actually, and then just getting to shout about it afterwards. It's absolutely invaluable when you're trying to grow organically. This is just a more general point on PR. I think something we did well, being in a growth sector or doing market creation. So it was a sector we owned for quite a while ourselves, and we definitely created. It gives you a great opportunity to do thought leadership. So we've always made sure we put PR out there. We try and comment on the industry. We try and make sure we're saying something people want to read about the future of the industry. And it's quite easy to do that if you're in an emerging sector. Events was the other one. I mean, this isn't really in line with things. Is it? We were good at getting sort of free or near free deals on events, or certainly pushing aggressively over the cost of them. But it is important in the B2B market to be out there. Again, it's easy, I think, to go a B2B business organically, because if you're out there and you're meeting people, you will win business. That's what we've always found. So productising and expanding, we're in a different phase now, really. It's because we bootstrapped everything and we were taking on client projects that distracted from core development, and we, that makes it difficult to focus. And it's a real juxtaposition when you're trying to build, because you've got this long-term goal in mind, but actually chasing the cash constantly. But what we've started to do now is to productise a lot more. So this is just an example of where we've templated. These again are all relatively small brands. Wallace you've probably heard of, but Mark Warren, their holiday brand, Bliss and Elemis, kind of cosmetic brands. So for our small and mid-sector clients, we couldn't deliver them a fully custom solution, the same as what we delivered for M&S and John Lewis. So what we did was we templated it a lot more. So you see all these ads look pretty much exactly the same. And that took a bit of time to template, but that's where we now get to scale the market, obviously change the margin, and it's a lot easier to deliver. The other thing is piloting. So we didn't have a user interface for a long time. We didn't need them working with the big brands because they want a full service model, but we desperately needed them to access the mid-sector. So pilot projects are really great. I think we've done that quite effectively. So Staples and lastname.com were the two pilot clients we used for the platform. Charged them some fees, but gave them benefits for actually being involved in the pilot program. It really helped subsidise the product development there. Get the thing built. This is just a point around culture, really. So with the growth and productisation comes expansion in headcount, obviously. Something we've done really well is we've retained our culture. It's obviously not trivial to do, moving from 5 people to over 50 in a few years' time. This is just our internal Facebook page. It's probably quite sensitive, actually. There's nothing I shouldn't be showing on there, but it's just the kind of office vibe, when the sales guys closing a deal and going on there and telling everybody, and people commenting on it. It's great to see that sort of thing, and it's really easy with social media these days. We should probably use that product that Microsoft just brought rather than Facebook, but does anyone know what I mean? Yeah, that's the one. But Facebook just does the job as well. And I think we've managed to retain a great culture where everyone still feels like they're bought into to a vision and a team that's moving with them. So some of that's a bit anecdotal, but what I wanted to talk to you about is some of the opportunities and trends that I'm seeing in the e-commerce area. I've only picked out 3 because I didn't want to sort of bombard you with stuff, probably be here all day. But the 3 that I'd draw your attention to, if I've turned you on enough that you would like to start a business in the e-commerce sector and you'd like to do it with a small amount of money, then these are the areas that I would sort of be looking at. Big data is one. So how many of you have heard that phrase before? All of you? Great. It's not just. I wasn't sure how that would transfer through to your, to the more educational side, but it's all anyone's talking about in marketing at the moment, and they've actually kind of stopped talking about it now because they're not really getting anywhere. But big data, the basic point is there's so much out there now. Users do so much online, and there's all these silos of data in Facebook, and they've got X amount of data on their users, and to show another set that's actually similar but overlaps. In marketing, there's myriad opportunities to capitalise on this, and I'm going to show you what I think is doing well. There's a lot of people building businesses around just siloing data, storing it better than it was stored before, storing more volumes of data, but not actually doing anything useful with it, which I think is why it's started to lose some traction recently. But there's 1 or 2 that have done really well. So how many of you know Prettier? You're not from Prettier, are you?
No, but it follows you around the web, doesn't it?
It does. I was about to say there's really annoying ads, but they're one of our best partners, so I shouldn't say that. There's really high-performing ads that follow you around. So if you're on John Lewis looking at a product, and then later on you're on Channel 4, publish your website, you see a display ad, a banner, and it says, do you want to buy that pair of boots that you looked at earlier? The answer is yes, that's why I looked at them. But understandably, it performs really, really well. But that's just, for me, they're a big data business, not in the sense that most people are talking about these days, but what they did was gather a massive amount of data, and they delivered a kind of point of sale retargeting solution, which is more, I think, where the opportunities are in this area. There's no point having a massive database and thinking, oh, we'll data mine it at some point in the future and commercialise it somehow. What you need is the kind of real-time decision-making capability. So I think there's a lot more development to do in this area, but those guys are just one simple example of how they can use what is a relatively complex amount of data on the user's interaction with an online journey to actually make a decision and improve the chance of making a sale and conversion. Just commercially, you can see, I don't know if you've seen the key figures on this slide, but they're doing absolutely fantastic at the moment. It's sickening, but it's a nice business. The other phenomenon, I won't go on about big data for too long, so you're obviously all bored already. But second screen's a big thing. How many of you heard of second screen? Yeah, cool. That's good to see as well. This is some infographics that I pulled on the second screen. You can probably read them yourselves, but But I think this is a big trend actually. I think someone's going to crack it. The holy grail of second screen is when you're watching telly, when you're watching football in 90 minutes, and then a Ford Galaxy drives across the telly screen in the advert at half time, it drives onto your iPad and then you interact with it there. That's actually not quite the holy grail because, so what, I'm not going to buy a Ford Galaxy on my iPad. But if you can do that with products and start to contextualize stuff, it's a big opportunity. Having said that, the stats suggest that people don't want, they don't want advertising thrown at them more. I just think there's a lot of kind of tech service businesses that will grow up in this sector. It's not a straightforward problem to solve, right from kind of how you actually connect to the TV and how you actually do point of sale on the device as well. So there's a bit of an ecosystem developing already, but none of these guys have really cracked it. I think you can start a business in any one of these areas and have a chance of getting some great capitalisation in the sector, I think. And the last one is social commerce. So I'm really into this area, but basically, verdicts, Facebook was one of those things a couple of years ago, how the hell do we commercialise it? And advertisers have generally decided now and accepted that it's not a place where people will ever shop animation. So, people don't want to transact in that channel. I think that's evident. So the whole building a Facebook store, doing shopping within Facebook for normal products, for retail products. We looked at it obviously with our business background, and I think we made the right decision not to overinvest. Lots of people build products to do that, and people just don't want to shop there for stuff. Having said that, there are massive opportunities there on social, and the guys are sort of getting it right. I feel no one's cracked it yet, but the businesses that are doing other stuff like just enabling commerce with a social angle are the ones I think that have got a future. Have any of you heard of kiosks at all? No, it's worth looking at. It's an interesting business. All they've done really is, I'll show you the website if it's not on the internet. They basically enable you to create widgets and stuff that you can share socially. So a piece of video content, you can actually tag it up with the products in it and then share that in a social channel, which is obviously quite interesting. I just like that because it's more about sharing and encouraging people to be social than it is about commerce. The commerce is a side effect, and I think that's the future for that sector. But there's a ton of businesses waiting to be started, and we're looking at that as well. So that's it. That's the presentation part. I was told to do 25 minutes, and then hopefully shift to Q&A if you guys have got questions, which would be great. So yeah, should we move over to that?
So you developed Fusepump partially in university. How did you feel that it was trying to take that IP out of university and building a business around it?
Good question, which you mentioned before, didn't you? It was very easy for me because I was an undergrad. I think the statutes or whatever it can say there are a lot more control over postgrads. If it's a research project and it's been sponsored either by them or by somebody else, I think they actually try and claim a third of the royalties by default or something. But for me, it was quite straightforward. There was one thing I did, which was when I filed my dissertation, which was related to the technology that I developed at the time, and had some kind of innovative stuff in it that I wasn't sure I might want to protect in the future. I did speak to a patent lawyer and managed to get a kind of draft on the front of the dissertation saying it's only going to be looked at by XYZ person who's marking it, and it's my property. Which again, they have no problem with this. They sign that off without asking any questions because I think because I was understood. So that was the only barrier I had. It didn't end up being an issue. I'm not that precious about IP in the software space anyway because it's very difficult to enforce. You're much better off having a defensible business advantage. So we didn't end up buying patents. Yeah.
If you would have the choice, I mean, you're sort of in the prototype stage, building the prototype. If you have the choice between sort of a big client working on a trial with a big client or smaller clients, I mean, what would you, I mean, both, or would you choose between one and another?
That's a really good question. It's difficult, obviously it's case by case, and it'll make or break you as a business trying to do this type of growth, making the right decisions on those things. We've got a couple wrong. So the value in the smaller guys is they're more agile, they're often letting you do more interesting things. So you might have a project that in terms of future value or technology assets that you're driving from delivering that project is huge. But by the same token, some of the smaller guys can be very demanding as clients as well. If they're spending proportionately quite a large amount of their revenue on you, we're very careful about it. I have one project that was a complete failure, but most of them have been really valuable. I guess I'm not really sure how to answer that. It's case by case. You can't make the right decisions. There's absolutely value in both ends, doing work for big clients and small clients. Yeah.
As a new e-commerce company, how do you show credibility when trying to win over large clients?
That's a good question. Well, it was interesting for me because I'm still very young. Most of our clients don't know that I'm 26, and it would have actually been very difficult going in there as a 23-year-old saying to M&S, yes, I should be doing digital marketing. If they knew that, so I used to lie and tell them I was 32. It's now come back to bite me because everyone thinks I'm about 40 now. But yeah, so I guess it was an issue for me because I definitely tried to enhance my credibility and went in everywhere I could. The other thing is you don't have a CV. I still don't really have much to do because I've always been an entrepreneur. But yeah, it's very easy to hide. The reason it wasn't an issue for us is because we have an innovative technology that can buy from anywhere else, and we genuinely knew our stuff. I guess that's the thing. It was never a problem for me because we were in a position to advise them in this space because they couldn't do it themselves, and we know way more about it than they ever would. So that's all you can do really is make sure you actually are credible. And on a superficial level, yeah, maybe lie about your age, maybe try and boost your reputation. You never get asked about questions like that. Seriously, talking to the big brands in the early days, I thought I'm never going to be able to sell to these guys. They're going to ask us any minute if you're going to sell a meeting thinking he's about to say how many people are you or what's your turnover or something like that, and they just don't. Not when you do something innovative that they believe in. Never got asked. And it very rarely came up, where did you work before? I used to dread that question as well. What was your previous experience? It just didn't ask. I think probably big brands are easier to work with because some of these smaller guys, they might see small projects, there are a bit more sort of thorough. So I hope that's your question. Yeah?
Okay, Robert, a quick question. How did you go about creating the first team with these 5 people? What were your criteria, etc.?
Well, the ownership structure was, myself, I built the technology, and I had another business partner, still a business partner who started and took over the development from me after we left Cambridge. She was my mate at university and he still works here. We partnered with a more commercial guy with a sales experience, which the Vibrant Media actually do. I don't know if you know, they do that contextual advertising format where you hover over, Green underlined words and it shows you something relevant to that. And they've grown like kind of hundreds of millions of sales in Europe. So he came in as the sales lead. But yeah, I think we had those 2 guys obviously. So one of them was tech, one was business. I had myself who kind of sat between the 2 areas. We then hired, our first couple of hires were all developers, so it was a case of actually getting stuff done. And we hired those through recruitment consultants actually. That's how we did it quickly. It ends up costing, I think, as a percentage of our revenue, a massive percentage of the cost for the first few years was recruitment fees. Paying $100 million, something like that, which was completely disproportionate. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes, just it was quite interesting to find out for a startup. Yeah.
I think the problem is hiring people quick enough. That's always been our problem. It's still our problem. Obviously, got to make sure the quality's there. One there?
Dennis, could you comment on the failed small company project?
I can't say it was for. You won't know them anyway, but comment in what way?
Tell us about how it started, how did you fail, how did you roll with it?
Yeah, basically it was early on, and it's very easy for someone to come in with what you've got after a few months is credibility as a business, and going back to your point, something as a team and individual. So other people start asking you to do other things because you've got the credibility. But it's very easy to say, yes, we can do a project over here, there's nothing to do with our core business model. And it's very easy for someone to pay a lot of money to do that. The problem is whether it's going to add any value to the business whatsoever. So the problem we had with that was it was a really attractive amount of money at the time that we wanted to take. And we signed up for it, but they were a relatively small client. And they were just very demanding, the time load was huge. It was a lot of money to them as well as to us. And it was just a bit of a disaster, to be honest with you. It just was a complete distraction. And 12 months later, we ended up cutting it off and sort of I would never tell a client to go away, but we ended up sort of gradually winding the project down. It had nothing to do with our core business. We had a team of 3 developers sat there working on it, and it was just nothing to do with anybody else. So. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Those are the ones not to do. I can't answer your question because we have got it wrong quite a few times. But yeah. One down there at the front.
Slightly computer sciencey question. I was curious about the screen scraping thing.
Yeah.
How did you make sure that it worked across different websites?
Well, that's our core IP, so that's the platform that I've been working on since about 15 actually. Having a proprietary scraping platform is kind of the thing that we entered the market with. It's a completely non-trivial problem to solve. and it's why we've still got a good defensible advantage. But how do we do it? We basically do it at browser level. So the technology we use is kind of a wrapper around your browser. It's not a browser plugin, but it's similar to that. So the theory is that actually, if you can see it and use the website as a user, then there's no reason you can't automate that process. That's how we do it, basically.
So do you think it's at the core of Fusepump's offerings even today?
No, it's interestingly changed because we're more of a platform now. At the start, that was the reason clients bought from us, because what it means is there's no implementation cycle. We can say to them, we can advertise you in all these channels you want to be in, and all they have to do is sign this contract. They're like, we don't need any tech resource, we don't have to do anything at all. And you say no, so it's a massive USP. It's still a USP that we have that our competitors don't, but actually the value's in the platform, because people are building better feeds now, and what we'd rather do is integrate a feed if they've got one. That was really driven by Google Shopping, by the way. Once Google Shopping published a decent feed format and said, and obviously there was a massive incentive to use it because the traffic was free at the time, we just started charging for it. That kind of drove a massive insurge of retailers going, it's worth building our own feed now. So we've got to be really careful what our value is in the platform and the management of the downstream applications rather than the actual piece. So I wouldn't say it's critical to our business model anymore.
Sorry, it's just a question related to one of your services. You talked about pilot programs and something about platforming. I'm not that familiar with the language, so do you mind explaining a bit more what that is?
So what I meant by pilot program, which I think would be the general consensus, is where a client's kind of coming on board as an early adopter, and you can wrap it up in an agreement if you want, like a legal agreement, but basically, normally you're not charging them, or you're charging them a certainly reduced fee, and you're open with them about the fact that they're going to be the first client to use the project. So it's what you normally do is give them it for free in exchange for kind of them being part of some agreed feedback format, saying you're going to be the first client to use this, but we're going to need this from you, we need that from you, and we're working together and collaborating on it. Obviously that's very different from signing with corporates where you want to charge them a fee and it's all standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a powerful tool for kind of subsidising product, obviously. Because we do charge for our pilots, but we don't charge as much for them, and we make sure that the clients are aware that they're We've also done projects where they've been the first client doing it and we just haven't told them. We do that quite regularly as well. So that's another way of doing it. You can still charge, full work for projects if you need to. We wouldn't do it now, but in the early days it was a key part of our success. Is one over there?
So I'm just wondering what your opinion is on NFC, not for payments, but for facilitating e-commerce. Is there a role for it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Barclays have got that app now, haven't they? The payment one. I think it's a massive part of Google's strategy. We do a lot of work with Google, and we have a great relationship with them. I just bought one of our semi-competitors from the US, a company called Channel Intelligence. They bought for $120 million. But yeah, it's a huge part of their strategy, and if they get it right, then it should work. But they've not got it right before. Like Google Checkout didn't really work. It's about having a single point of sale, isn't it? Really, it's kind of the NFC that's not that interesting.
But I guess that's a payment. So going away from payments, more in terms of driving sales, not just finishing the sale. Do you think there's a role for it in that sort of situation?
Yeah, because there's already apps that are adding value there. Like I think if you heard of Shops Alley that I mentioned earlier. So that's one way you scan a barcode and it'll do comparison for you. I think tying it all together end to end and being able to actually do the transaction at that time as well, more straightforwardly, there's definitely value in that. I know a couple of other businesses who are not using NFC necessarily, but more doing the actual transaction automation. Because a lot of mobile transactions are still really crummy. Like even big retailers like John Lewis's haven't actually built their checkouts properly yet for mobile commerce. So there's another one called Simply Tap that you might want to look at. But I guess you're more talking either end actually, like drives online to offline sales. Are you thinking?
Yeah, so the whole second screen thing is where it came from.
Yeah, that's a huge area. The whole online to offline piece, multi-channel as retailers call it. There's a lot of tech to be built in that sector as well. Anything that means that you can tie up your offline sales with your online sales. Because whilst everyone says the high street's diminishing, people down on desolate high streets, the retail function will change, and more of the sales will go through e-commerce because people go and look at stuff in the shop and then they go home and actually order online. Debenhams have that point of sale. I don't know if you've seen that. You can go in the store and you can scan something and then it'll get delivered to you as it goes. So that type of technology is really interesting. Any more? Yeah. One up there?
Yeah, you talked about credibility with big brands.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned you were lying about your age and focus was the technology. Do you have any other advice for us to boost our credibility?
Credibility. I'll say what I said before. The main thing is knowing your stuff. Like, I guess I'm quite a confident person, so I don't have a, you know, I talk with authority about things, you know, which is important. Not everyone has that skill, I guess. So that's something to work on. Is being able to talk confidently. It just shouldn't be an issue. If you know your stuff, then you shouldn't feel under pressure anyway. But nothing else really, because I've never had a problem with it. Like I said, I completely accept it too, but I've never had a problem with it. So I don't think anything else, unfortunately.
I was just wondering, when you were scaling your business, so you went from 5 to 50, what kind of problems did you encounter and how did you solve them in terms of managing your people, so an increasing workforce, and your finances? I'm presuming you didn't have a kind of finance kind of experience, so how did you manage your cash flows and all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. You become a hobby accountant very quickly. You also become a hobby lawyer very quickly. So you say you don't have we have extensive financial experience now over the 4 years, but I do have an FD now. It took 3 years to get to the stage where I was retiring kind of FD on a part-time basis who we use now, and that's a big relief. But just in terms of, it was partly a question about cash flow, I guess, wasn't it, as well?
And managing people, obviously,
yeah,
5 people, okay, to manage 50 is a lot.
I think it's a huge learning curve again. It's kind of similar to the credibility point. You don't plan any of this, and it's a great accident when it happens. You know, when there's 25 people there and something's going right, but yeah, it's not for everybody. It's been a huge learning curve. I haven't actually done any formal management training or been on any courses or anything like that. We have quite a young management team overall, partly because I've tended to hire younger people, I suppose. And we have invested heavily in training for them, which has been really valuable. I would send them to CIPD and stuff like that on leadership and management courses. I've never actually done that myself. Just kind of learned it on the job. So you just have to work with it. Yeah. Up at the top, sorry.
In a tech startup environment, what order would you recommend hiring people? So for instance, if you start and say you have 1 business and 2 engineers, right, and 3 co-founders, what order do you then hire, say, the next 5 or 10? Specifically, when do you bring on your first UX person, like full-time UX? I think that's a difficult point for a lot of startups is when they bring on designers in place of just another engineer.
Yeah, definitely. It's a difficult question to answer because it's case specific. Again, it'll make or break you hiring people at the right time. My main, honest answer on that would be we have got it wrong recently. You find yourself making up job descriptions. The best research you can do is looking at other companies like you, seeing what job titles they have, seeing what they do and how their organisation is actually structured. Because in the early stages, and this goes back to your question about how you actually grow, quite frequently you would highlight the wrong person, not the wrong person normally, you just fundamentally hire good people and things will work anyway. But you'd hire the wrong job description, you'd say, well, we need this job title and here's the description. It's very easy to write it down on a piece of paper and it makes perfect sense, but then when you start you realise that's not actually job function needed. We've done it mainly by trial and error, that we have been situations where we've had to sort of say, that's not the right role. But what we've done is always had great people, so we would never get rid of somebody if the role turns out to be wrong or massage them in the direction we want them to go. And only in the past 12 months I would say we've stopped doing that, and we're now writing job specs that are clear. We've got an organisation structure, we've got salary bands and all that stuff. Like it's very straightforward now to scale. But it's trial and error, absolutely, at the start. Yeah.
How did you hire managers? Did you go for tech people or?
The tech management thing's a really interesting one. I've never hired senior devs. We do have 1 or 2 senior devs, but I always say this to people, the business side wise, the experience is redundant quite quickly. So someone with 10 years banking experience as a senior developer that knows the technologies, they're not going to know the technologies we're actually using to build apps now, because MongoDB is only been around, the big data is only been around, kind of a heartbeat. So we've always hired young guys. On the tech side, the management thing is really challenging because fundamentally, normally developers aren't kind of born to lead or do management roles. So what we've done is kept the management responsibilities really soft. So we now have lead developers, and what they do is they're responsible for assigning tasks to other people and providing support when somebody starts, to the people beneath them. It's not like a management role. We kind of try and work them in small teams as well, so 2 to 3 devs working on any particular thing. Does that answer your question on the tech side?
Yeah, so very much so keeping it in with the tech people.
Definitely, yeah.
It's the general managers, yeah.
Yeah, precisely, yeah. The more general management roles, I guess, you just look for experience, you look for people who have got some management experience. And that normally pays off. Yeah. Sorry, the back of the window while I'm...
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you see yourself doing for the next 5 or 10 years? Do you want to start another startup?
Yes, yes, I do. Well, I've got an idea. Yeah, so definitely doing another startup. But ideas have never been a problem for me. I've got loads that I'd like to do now. But what I've started doing recently is looking for other people, because time and commitment is a big thing. I think I wouldn't have the energy to do another startup like this again. I think we'd need someone else's cash, or maybe my own cash. We need more funding. It'd be a different kind of style of business, because the organic route is really hard. You're kind of working late nights, delivering projects to pay bills and stuff like that. It was a really tough slog for the first few years. I don't think I'd have the energy to do that again tomorrow, so I'd rather find someone young and foolish who does have that energy and invest some money in that. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, looking at other businesses that I can potentially invest in, do advisory roles for, and do the capital too. If you think what you can do for 35 grand, that's not a lot of money. If anyone's got an idea that they can do with 35 grand, I'd probably write a check now, actually. so yeah, does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah.
I don't really know what I'm doing, honestly, in terms of, I'm not married or anything with any kids, so I bought a dog though last week. Down the phone, yeah.
Yes, one question. You mentioned briefly that you had to learn the ways of the lawyer, but can you comment briefly on sort of the intricacies of creating contracts with these big clients like M&S and Genuine? Was that difficult? Were there any caveats that you would like to share with us about?
That's a really good question, actually. I'm going to ask that. Again, yeah, you've got to learn a lot about the job. Working with big companies is much better because they tend to want to do it themselves. So they'll do the procurement process for you. They'll send you a contract. You can send them your contract. So from day one, we always had a contract. We went to see a lawyer and paid whatever it is, £1,000, £2,000 to just get our initial terms and conditions in place. Then they change every 15 minutes because your product's going around like that and you don't really know what you do. So you have to spend a bit more. But you make sure at any one time you've got your operating contract, and the preference is you send that to the client and they sign it off. But with the big brands, they don't. They say you send them out and they go, thank you very much, and they send you back something completely different. And then you kind of try and massage your terms into that. We've always been quite commercial with it. Like, you don't actually have that much in the early stages. It's kind of easy. You'll sign anything to some extent. But what we've done is a lot of renegotiation over time. So we're constantly reviewing contracts, and like we have a very different contract with some of the larger retailers now than we did when we first started with them. We can't just sign what they wanted us to sign. But we've not spent a lot of money on kind of recurring legal advice. But there are some good services out there as well, by the way, like legal help desks, where you can pay a standard sort of retainer fee and then be able to pick up the phone to them. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. I think working with client contracts where you can save money, as long as you're not too precious about some of the legal terms in it. For the larger stuff, like that, I had a massive contract with Nokia last year, and that was took a long time, but they were nice to work with and they did most of the work again. We didn't incur any legal fees at all, we just negotiated it. But most of it's commercial anyway. What you've got to get right in the contract is what you're going to do for them, and the liability. Just make sure that you're not agreeing to lots of liability for something you shouldn't. So that helps a little bit. Any more? Yes?
Web developers are pretty expensive. So if you have a good idea but you just sort of don't have the tech knowledge yourself, are there sort of alternative and effective routes you could use?
Yes, there are. Like one of the businesses I'm advising at the moment is using an agency to build a proof of concept. That's why I actually put the slide in on the 3 Venn diagram, because what's lacking is product ownership there. You've got to look at the team, kind of, the business needs to have someone who can sort of do that stuff. I'm a bit biased because I'm from a developer background, so be careful that you're not, if you are going to pay an agency to do it, to build it or hire it out to somebody else, be careful that you've actually got the right business model, because if it's heavily technical and you don't really own the product, it's going to be tough. But yeah, that's what I would do is if it's right and you think it's the right thing to do, just use an agency to build it. It's probably not going to be any cheaper actually. But, there's also agencies who will do things like take sweat for equity, potentially with early stage businesses. I'd probably recommend it actually. But does that help at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How do you take money out of a business if you're growing organically? So if you get a big seed round and you get a money bomb, it's fairly obvious how you would take money out. But if you're growing organically and plowing most of your cash back into the business, how do you get it out?
Yeah, you don't sometimes. No, you can't. we've always been a very cash positive business, and obviously we've had to, you can't do anything without being. The one thing that made a big difference for us is invoice factoring as well worth looking at if you're trying to do organic growth. Do you know what it is? Or I'll just recap it. It's where you get a finance facility. The banks love it at the moment because they don't want to give you an overdraft. They want to offset it against your debtors book. So if you've got at any one time we're at nearly £1 million in total on our debtors book, which is a large amount of money. And so actually the profit from that previous 3 years of the business is never there. It's wrapped up in what people owe you over the next 30, 60, 90 days. But people will finance you on that basis, so the banks will do invoice factoring. That was one thing that made a bit of a difference for us in terms of having cash back in the business. You know, it means there's cash there, but I wouldn't take it out to spend on lots or anything like that. I think the honest answer is, if you're going to do organic growth, there isn't cash flying around all the time. It took a couple of years to get to a situation where we could pay ourselves, you know, good wages and stuff like that. So that's probably the easiest answer. But then again, you can't do it with VC either, because you get a contract. You don't get written a €3 million VC check and then go buy the yacht. So it's roundabouts. Sorry, you have one as well.
Yeah, have you ever considered to take external cash to grow faster or make the company bigger?
Yeah, we're looking at it at the moment quite actively. So we wouldn't need a massive amount. We've never known how to spend it, and we've always been quite cash positive, but reinvested a lot of the funds. So obviously targeting growth. The only reason we're looking at doing it now is it's more strategic. It's because there are more competitors in the market. There's new people coming in, and some of those are funded. So you don't want to get left behind. But we've never needed it or been able to justify kind of how it would materially grow the business. But we look at it constantly. So I look at it every month. We constantly sort of change our minds on whether we're raising or not. But we are actually about to raise something this time. Yes.
Going back on your profitability side, as you said, the first 2 years was kind of tough, and you mentioned a bit how you structured your company in the very beginning, like how you choose your partner. I don't know if you can share with us technically, meaning like, if I understood correctly, you were pretty much the owner of the software of the platform, so you have a really big competitive advantage because you were owning the technology, right?
Yeah.
So how did you share that with others? Meaning like, let's say that I'm you and I have this company, but I need to partner with somebody. Technically, what kind of company or did you put in place in order to make it work?
I see what you mean. I think so the answer would be licensing, I think, is that what you're driving at? If you're trying to let other people use your software without giving it to them, is that what you're getting at?
I was honestly more referring on your company structure, meaning like dealing exactly with the first 3-4 people that you started with.
Yeah.
How did you manage it? Like you are getting like the biggest share, because like as you said, the first 2 years you were not able really to pay each other, so they had to stick in the company without getting money fundamentally, right? So they got like a part of the company as a share. You gave them like a percentage of the future revenues.
So you mean more in terms of the management team and the founding team?
Yeah.
How do we actually split things and share things?
Yeah.
Just using equity actually was our thing. We actually so there's the equity split, which should fundamentally govern exit. You know what your reward is relative to other people's. But then a lot of companies have different agreements about how salaries are going to be paid, and that's what we've always done is actually the same. 3 founders. We all have different amounts of equity, but we all take the same salary. So but there's lots of different ways of doing it, and the two things don't have to be linked. You can sort of agree whatever you want in terms of remuneration. At the end of the day, it's relationship based. If you can't, people should be earning their value. The equity kind of takes care of itself, in my opinion, because if you get it right at the start, people then know from then on what their stake is. So it changes sometimes when you raise a sales fund and dilution and things like that, but at the end of the day, you get out of bed and go in the office every morning knowing what your equity stake is. So that bit's kind of okay, but how much you want to get paid for your day job, unless there's actually some cash to pay you, that can be a sensitive point. We decided to just all pay the same, because it's the easiest thing to do.
Sure.
It could be a contentious issue if we didn't get on so well, or there was problems, or someone was doing more work than the other people, or something like that. Is that it? Oh, one more.
I was just wondering how many guys you have working kind of in sales and marketing departments, and what's the kind of salary package? So do they work on commission? I've heard different things about tech companies hiring people working commission and renovation and all that sort of stuff.
That's a really good question. Again, there's a lot of trial and error there. We got it wrong last year, and probably the year before. Not not going to be paying too much, they weren't incentivized enough, they weren't motivated enough. What we do now is the sales team have sales targets, and they get a bonus for hitting their sales targets. They don't get a bonus if they don't hit a certain percentage of their sales target. That's how we structure it. They get a kicker on top of that as well. If they exceed their sales target, they get a percentage of what they exceeded by. That's taken a bit of time to get right. I've tried other models and stuff like that. The problem with that model is the targets have to be right, and we got them badly wrong this year. So we had a team that was not motivated. Towards the end of the year, we didn't refocus or anything, and they just weren't motivated. And refocused in this year, and we've had the best quarter like for ages this first quarter, because they just motivated again. So it's really important you get it right. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but that's what worked for us.
Are they mainly graduates or?
Yeah, they're mainly. What, the sales team?
Yeah, well, in terms of people that
kind of a few years experience in digital basically.
Yeah.
That is the sweet spot for us. Some of them get different experience. So we have a big international team, so we're all based in the UK, but we do a lot of business internationally. Most of our clients are pan-European, so like ASOS, we've got in 10, 12 markets, something like that. So we have an international director as well, and she is more experience really. Yeah.
Percentage-wise, how many work in sales?
Yeah. So we're mainly tech, so about half the staff are tech and development. The sales team's about 4 actually, so it's quite small. It's been bigger. It was bigger in the middle of last year, but it didn't really work out. It was too big at the time, I think. I think you'll find more sales people in sales will go up, which is great if it happens, but if it doesn't, you need to act quickly. So that's kind of what's stabilised at now, the sales team. And the client services team, that's a big part of what we do as well, is actually the account management and stuff. They're very commercial as well, you see. So the client, if a client's happy for us, they'll constantly be ordering more channels and saying, we want to do more activity, we want to advertise here and here and here. And that's our best measure of client satisfaction. So they're not a sales team, they're there to service the client, and they do have some kind of bonus structure linked to performance as well. And they're about 10, 12 days.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's give a final clap for